Okay, so we're going to make a start. So group one can come up. The main rules of today is a presentation 20 minutes. It can be less if you have less than 4 in a group pro rata. Most of you have got a lot of slides, but this group hasn't, so I'm going to be an achievement to do it in 20 minutes. But try not to overrun. I will let you know if you've gone past your 20 minutes. I won't cut the final speaker off unless it is the final speaker who's causing the massive overrun. Okay, so if you start off by 1 minute to by this clock here, and I'll be keeping a note of your times. So group one, over to you.
Okay, so how might information technology and communications contribute to sustainable transport? So we'll go through the background to transport and sustainability, the types of intelligent transport systems, advantages and disadvantages, a quick comparison table, and then case studies and conclusions. So over 80% of passenger kilometres were by car, van or taxi in 2016, with 62% of trips by car, 25% by walk-in, 5% by bus, 2% by train and 2% by cycling. Last year, 4.9 billion passenger journeys were on local bus services, which is 61% lower than 1950, despite a population increase of 30%. Emissions of transport are increasing faster than any other energy-using sector. The Royal College of Physicians claim that air pollution shortens the lives of 40,000 people per year in the UK, which is sort of an overlap of those two figures. 58% of domestic transport greenhouse gas emissions were from cars and taxis, which is the same as 30 years ago. However, most pollutants have halved in the past 30 years, except for particulate matter. Half of the 24 million commuters in England and Wales in 2018 said that their commute increases their stress. The average travel time to work is 25 minutes by car, 59 by train, and 15 by walk-in. And the average commuter time in London is 46 minutes, and the shortest is in Wales at 23 minutes. 1,770 people were killed on the roads in 2018, and there's a compliance of just 1 in 5 cars in 20 zones. The cost of a fatality is £1.7 million, and the overall cost per rush hour driver, included wasted fuel and time, is just under £1,200 per year. And the traffic jams cost the economy £9 billion per year. So we'll run through these ITS solutions and give a quick insight to automation. So demand management, congestion charging puts drivers off travelling through the city centres by charging a fee once you enter the boundary. This can be done per day, like in London, or every time you enter the zone, and different prices at different times of the day, like in Oslo, or licensing on wind screens like they used to do in Singapore. Alternatively, you could make roads more bicycle, pedestrian and public transport friendly to encourage people to switch modes. Advantages include a high impact. You get a 21% decrease in traffic, well in London you did, and a 30% decrease in congestion. There's more opportunities to partake in active travel, and obviously lower pollution due to the decreased cars. Disadvantages include it's expensive capital costs to set up the boundary, and it's expensive for individual drivers and tradesmen who work in the area. There's an argument for lost businesses for the firms. And the city needs to ensure there's enough public transport to switch to once the zone goes live. Demand responsive transport systems, there's some examples on the board. It's a form of transport where vehicles alter their routes based on particular transport demand rather than a fixed timetable. So it's sort of like in between a cab and an ordered bus service in terms of passenger ability to change the route. Dial-a-ride is a cheap transport service in London for people who are virtually unable to use public transport. In Southampton they have the Social Care and Action Bus, which is £2.50, about the same price as Unilink for people who have limited mobility. But it often needs some sort of funding, like the Easy Mile is autonomous and it carries up to 15 people in America around campuses, but I doubt the students are funding that through tickets by themselves. Eliminating the need. So if you eliminate the need to travel, by using technology, you're able to make a more sustainable society. So, for example, video conference calls, they're all happy, they haven't had to travel today. Working from home, they could have rolled out of bed, they could be four couples at home. And then a lot of you don't travel to lectures, so you're saving the environment by using Panopto. Advantages include reducing traffic, obviously, higher productivity due to less time spent travelling, and it saves money for the business and for the personal individual driver. Disadvantages, less personal, you don't get the handshake at the start of a meeting. Functionality issues, 40% of video conferencing meetings have issues. And the need for professionalism causes the need for expensive hardware and software. Otherwise you're going to lose to people who turn up in suits. Public transport priority and management. So buses can be fitted with radio, infrared or GPS. And a central system will receive a priority request which changes the lights in favour of public transport. And it leads to a higher satisfaction for public transport. So it can be used on multi-purpose roads that buses use, or on bus lanes to give buses priority at lights controlling a separate lane. Advantages include a more reliable public transport system, less emissions from buses, or overall if more people switch. Disadvantages are that it's quite expensive to fit out every bus with GPS and all the lights, and there's a potential to aggravate other members of the public. And if you're still not sure what it is, here's an example in Cardiff. So the bus lane has a giveaway sort of sign, there's traffic lights there, and when it's busy the buses can drop off passengers and still pull out in front, and the lights will detect it and change to allow it to do so. They can aggravate drivers when you get taxis swerving in and out using the bus lane or the other lane, depending on how good the traffic is.
Yeah, public transport information systems. I'm sure you've all seen like the screens at bus stops or at train stations as well that tell you if a train or a bus is delayed or cancelled. Obviously apps as well, such as City Mapper or Trainline, that will basically plan a journey for you. Yeah, basically advantages are it improves the commuter's experience because it just makes it easy for you to find the right route. It increases the efficiency of the system, and it's fairly low cost and high benefit in terms of the social aspect. Yeah. However, users like if they use apps, for example, I don't think my grandma could work out properly. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. Smart motorways. If there's high traffic, they can open the hard shoulder basically for an extra lane of traffic, which eases the flow, eases congestion, smooth the flow, and obviously variable speed limits as well. This will have less of an impact on, well, less stop-start travelling basically, and more reliable journey times. Advantages, on the M1, when they did it up north, they showed that it improves journey reliability by 22%, and accidents were reduced by more than half. And when accidents did happen, they were a lot less severe, and obviously noise reduction as well, which is a big problem. However, they have a long construction period. Obviously, sometimes a number of years for it to actually be there, and a high cost as well. The M27, for example, that's the strip between Junction 4 and Junction 11, which is like 15 miles. That's costing £250 million to do, and also it encourages driving, to be honest, because if the motorway to work is quicker now, you've got to drive, so it might be a bit of a problem now. And also using the hard shoulder will remove its purpose for emergency situations, such as stopping on the side if your car's broken down. Speed management, for example, in a lot of new cars it shows if you're basically get like a bleeping or a blinking sign if you're going over the speed limit, which is a passive example, because it doesn't actively stop your speed. And there's speed limiters like in the Suzu minibuses that you can rent, because I don't think they can't go over 65 miles per hour, I think. So that's an active method of speed management. And obviously less accident and less severe accidents due to lower speeding. For example, the active accelerator pedal is basically just, it pushes back if you're over the speed limit, so it doesn't just stop it at the speed limit, but it physically pushes back, so it basically reduces your speed. And however, young people have been shown to be less affected by passive measures because, it's only just blinking, like you're not going to, well, some people aren't going to slow down because of that. And also, it will take quite a long time for all cars to adapt to this, especially if roadside detectors need to be linked to cars or need to have certain sensors on the cars, obviously. And also, it removes the ability to escape dangerous situations. So, for example, if there's a dangerous driver behind you, or maybe someone's falling asleep, and you just want to get away from him, which obviously is quite dangerous as well, but it removes the ability to do that. Automation. Now, these are automations basically. It has different levels. So, it starts off with eyes on, hands on, and then you can sort of take hands off, eyes on, which means that in case of a problem, you need to be able to see the problem, and then you can get your hands back on and take over control. And then over to eyes off, hands off, but still only in certain situations, and then that's full automation where you literally don't have to do anything. I don't know, has anyone heard of the Tesla car crash in 2016? Yeah, that's basically what happened is the driver thought it was pretty much that level, because reports showed that he was watching Harry Potter on his phone while he was driving, so he didn't really have eyes on, but he should have had eyes on and should have been able to take over control once he saw an obstacle coming up. And yeah, he died from it, which is obviously very sad, and there was a long lawsuit and everything, yeah. So advantages: increased mobility, especially for elderly and people who aren't able to drive, disabled people. Decreased congestions, because automated cars will often take gaps that humans wouldn't take, because they can obviously work out, and there's no emotional factor in terms of being scared of getting hit by a car. Higher productivity, you can do work while the car's driving for you, basically, if it's fully automated. And it reduces accidents, because over 90% of accidents are caused by human error. So if the software is good enough, well, if the software is perfect, it would reduce theoretically by 90%. Obviously liability issues, because there's the regulation, because it's such a new technology, the regulations aren't quite up to date, which means, who's a full software engineer, the guy who should have been watching and been able to take over. Moral dilemmas as well. If anyone's heard of the moral machine, that's quite interesting. It's basically, it makes you decide, like, it gives you different cases in terms of who should the car kill, in terms of should it be an elderly person or should it be a baby. The car might not know that, so it's quite interesting to investigate how the car would react to different situations, and lots of jobs as well in terms of drivers. The last one is variable message sign applications that you see on the side of motorways, for example. They can warn you of high traffic and maybe propose different routes, and for events and other warning signs, basically. They show a high volume of information in a very short amount of time, and obviously quite a cheap method. However, they can distract drivers for a couple of seconds, which can in the end make a big difference. And often in new cars, or even if you have like Google Maps open while you're driving, it will often show you different routes already, so they are becoming a bit redundant as well. And in Wales, if they have multiple languages, they're going to need multiple signs, which obviously doubles the cost of them. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we've analysed, basically this is just our estimation. I'm sure you can have a look through it and see if you agree or disagree. Obviously demand management and smart motorways, high cost, high impact, whereas eliminating the need, obviously low cost but not a massive impact in terms of the actual changes it's going to make. Same with variable message signs, low cost, low impact.
So I'm just going to go through a few case studies which will outline some of the systems which Mark and Jake have explained to you already. The first one is the London congestion zone. The problem which this came around was because London had the worst congestion in the UK and some of the worst in Europe, and a 1995 report stated that the city's economy would benefit from a congestion charge scheme. This led them to their aim of reducing inner city traffic and preventing pollution. So to do this, they introduced an 8 square mile radius from the centre of London and a daily charge of £11.50 if you drive within this zone between 7 AM and 6 PM Monday to Friday. This is valid for all vehicles apart from those which are exempt, which includes electric, ultra-low emission vehicles such as hybrids and also two-wheelers. And the technological side of this comes from the monitoring by automatic number plate recognition, and then a system set up by IBM online which automatically sends you a charge. This has been very successful in promoting sustainability, and as Jake's already said, Traffic levels decreased 21%, with delays going down 30%. Improved human health arose due to reduced pollution, and the £2.4 billion which was generated in the first 10 years due to the charges, almost 50% of this is put back into the transport system, therefore having great improvements in that. The second case study is quite similar. It's the London Low Emission Zone. So this came about because in 2005, all of the monitoring sites exceeded the annual NO2 limits of 40 microgram per metre cube. And of these, 11 of them exceeded the hourly limit of 200 microgram per metre cube on over 18 occasions each. This is really bad, and in 2007, TfL estimated 1,000 people die in London annually each year due to air quality. So therefore, their aim was to improve air quality by setting an emissions-based standard for the vehicles within this area. So the low emission zone started in 2008. It covers a wide area, the whole of Greater London, and it's based on Euro engine classes. Vehicles that do not conform to these classes are charged, and this includes diesel vehicles over 3.5 tonnes, so buses, lorries, minibuses, that kind of stuff. In 2019, so very recently, they've also introduced the ultra low emission zone, which covers the same area as a congestion charge zone, but has much stricter requirements. So petrol engines must be Euro class 4 or above, diesel engines must be Euro 6, and also heavy duty vehicles must be Euro 6 or above, or they will all incur a £100 daily charge. This has again been very effective in promoting sustainability. Between 2009 and 13, NO2 fell by 65% on average over the addresses registered, and it's been said that London's become a safer and more pleasant place because of this. And also the benefits due to these newer vehicles extend beyond just this low emission zone because they're travelling from further afield. For the next study, we'll go further international to Bologna in Italy. It's a medieval town with very cramped roads, and due to parking and double parking on the street and just the way of life, at times transport grinds to a halt. Also due to the architecture and the buildings, it's very difficult for emissions to diffuse out of the area. Therefore, their aim was to improve the circulation of traffic, road safety, reduce environmental and noise pollution, and achieve energy savings. To do this, they had a multi-pronged attack using a lot of the techniques we've already illustrated. They have a traffic control centre, which they call Cesium, which is based in the heart of the city. It monitors all of the surrounding area, and it operates the traffic lights and the bus control zones and variable message signs, which aim to improve the flow of transport around the area and divert people towards better routes should they become available. They also have a mobile enforcement parking unit, which they call Scout, which moves around on the pavements and automatically detects parking infringements and gives fines to those vehicles. And they have a similar system for red lights, whereby if you run a red light illegally, you will automatically be issued a charge by the system. This promotes sustainability. Quite simply, parking was reduced by 55% illegally, and accidents reduced by 45%. So the final case study is Demandtrans, which is a North American company. They felt that transport services were outdated. They didn't fit in with the modern cities we have now. They said that consumers expect here and now responses, sort of on their phone, anytime, anywhere, and they thought that current systems were inflexible and unreliable. So to achieve their aim, they have a set of software packages which they've developed over the last few years, which they say enable smart cities, or their cities of the future. They have multiple different methods, such as run cutting and demand responsive transport, which are all integrated into a system based on these software packages. And they have what they say is the world's first dynamic mobility as a service platform. They call it Switch. These softwares integrate with each other to allocate bus systems where they're needed and run cutting software, and they reduce unnecessary travel and provide a more reliable transport network. They also say the communities are more inclusive and accessible because of their software, and because of this, money can be invested where it's needed, not in empty bus services running. So as a conclusion, we've explained to you today lots of different systems which can affect different areas of sustainability, but one, two, or all of them, depending on the system. Environmental sustainability can come through reduced congestion and pollution. Financial could be through commuter time and reducing accidents. And sustainability can be achieved through accidents, time, connection, and health improvements such as accident reduction. We feel that these ITS are going to become very important in the future as these smart cities evolve, and also vital in a world in which health and safety is paramount. These are references. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Okay, well done, Group 1. Your timing was spot on, but you probably knew that, because we practiced. Anybody got any questions for Group 1? I'm going to start off with Moritz. Connected and autonomous vehicles, are they going to be sustainable, do you think, in the round?
It depends what you mean by sustainable. It's socially and economically as well. Because obviously for companies as well, economically in terms of save a lot of money, but also eases congestion, less stops out driving, because like I was saying, there are a lot, there's no human emotions involved in them, so they're not scared of taking that gap that they know they can take, and they're not going to try and, if someone gets angry, they try and drive behind someone very closely. They're not going to do that. They're much more flowing. Like traffic is going to be a lot more flowing with autonomous vehicles. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of time for them all to be included into more traffic. Yeah.
Well, that would be true, assuming that demand for them was fixed. But won't they just generate lots of frivolous journeys? So, for example, I currently have to pay quite a bit of money a month to park my car here on Boulderwood. So if I had an autonomous vehicle, wouldn't I just send it back to park on my driveway? Particularly if the electricity costs are next to zero. Won't everybody do that?
Depends whether you include taxation on electric vehicles in the future, if every vehicle switches from diesel and petrol. Yeah, with demand management, I think.
Yeah, you need to think one step further on. So, a book I've quoted quite a bit is this Daniel Sperling book, The Three Revolutions, where he's talking about electrification, autonomy, and shared mobility. And my vision of a connected autonomous vehicle and how I described it, I own it. That's why it's going back to my driveway. But an alternative version it would be shared.
Yeah.
Because actually, if all the sensor technology you need for 99.999 several times % reliability is on there, that machine is going to be too expensive for one individual to own, and pretty inefficient to just use 1 hour out of every 24, which is what we do on average. So therefore you need some kind of sharing system, and then you might be able to control the explosion in frivolous journeys. I still think there might be problems there if it ever happens. Any other questions or comments?
Do you not think security is an issue with the autonomous vehicles? You mentioned
What sort of security? What do you mean in terms of security?
anyone can hack into devices.
Yeah, but you can also. People steal cars as well. It's always going to happen. You're always going to have crashes, and you're always going to have people. You're always going to have things going wrong. You're not going to be. There's not one technology when everything's gone smoothly. You're always going to have people stealing stuff and breaking into houses.
If this goes wrong, potentially could be catastrophic.
Yeah, I agree. And also, obviously,
So the security
they can
is
hack
still-
it and they can drive it somewhere while someone's in there or whatever. Yeah, I agree. But that's a challenge that needs to be addressed. But if it needs to be addressed, it's going to be addressed in a way, one way or another. Yeah.
So sometimes we talk about connected and autonomous vehicles can. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that it might be the connectivity bit that's more important than the autonomous bit. Because the connectivity bit is the vehicles talking to each other and the infrastructure, which means they can operate much more closely together. But you might still have a driver involved in some ways, and people like driving. think it might be the connectivity that's more important than the autonomy, which also is, I mean, Sperling's book title might not be right. Maybe it's 4 revolutions as this connectivity as well as the autonomy going on. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was saying a lot of the ITS stuff you're talking about is very heavily car orientated, and it's very much a lot of those improvements massively improve the car journey time, and not a lot of the ITS that was to public transport and railways really benefited public transport that much. Was there any other sort of ITS, or how you think there could be sort of more ITS to promote travelling by public transport instead of helping cars all the time?
Yeah, I think demand management is the main deterrent, and I think road pricing is going to be the most common thing you get in major cities in the future. And cities are going to implement this pay per hour and pay per mile sort of system. So I think it's deterring people from cars rather than, and with that money you can invest it in public transport rather than improving the technology and communication side of public transport, because I don't think.
Because like we said, 62% of trips are made by cars and only 2% by train, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
I don't
mean,
think.
At first, it's getting people away from the cars and using that public transport more, and obviously making it more accessible in terms of the systems that you do give them to make that, for you to make, like, what would they have to do for you to not drive the car to work anymore? You know, it would have to be so much easier for you to actually get public transport. So I think a lot of these systems are soft measures in terms of public transport information systems that will actually get you away from using your car and getting more people onto trains and buses.
I just wanted to ask, how easy do you think implementing these devices will be in like developing countries? It's very focused on countries that can easily accommodate these things in funding and whatever. But what about countries that maybe can't? It's not all about it being inclusive. Everybody needs to kind of take up these changes in order to benefit everybody. Just wanted to know what you think.
I think it's a good point. Obviously, the more developing countries, it's going to be harder to introduce things into because of funding and stuff. I'm sure someone's going to talk about that coming up today. It's very difficult to introduce stuff on a more information communication based system when they don't have that system in place yet. And I think softer measures such as information provision through talking to the locals, through leaflets, through flyers, that kind of stuff will be very important in those countries. And also, if they're currently less developed, then the systems that we have in place, such as these bus services and train systems which aren't fully working as we would like them to in the future, the developing countries can almost skip this step and use what we have learned into introducing it into their countries straight off as very good systems. So I'll skip out the bit which doesn't quite work at the moment. So I think that would be quite important to them when they do get around to doing the systems.
And it's not inevitable that new technologies develop slowly in low-income countries. So, for example, mobile telephony has taken off to a much greater extent than fixed-line telephony ever did in many low-income countries. And some of the first sort of mobile banking systems were in low-income countries. So I think there might be some possibilities, but of course the costs have to be the low-cost systems. Any other final question or comment? Okay, well, we'll let you off the hook now. You've done your stint. We'll give them one more applause. We'll change the order a bit, so it is group 6 next. But if you just give me we can start coming up, but it'll take me a bit of time to get your presentation up. That one, is that 6?
Yeah.
You know. But no, I can't see where the cursor is.
Need to move on slightly.
You want to move it around then? Go on. I'll leave you in control now.
Can you click on the YouTube link as well so that I can...
I'll start timing you when you're going to press the slideshow button.
Well, let the YouTube link. Click on the YouTube link. Actually, I'm going to click on it. I have to click on it anywhere.
What for you to slideshow?
Like that.
Yeah.
Don't know where the mouse is. How do you get out of this now? Oh, there you go.
I know you don't. Every time you do it, I'm like, you hate that.
Okay, you ready to start?
Yep.
Okay, off you go.
So we'll be focused on what progress has been made towards sustainable transport in towns in the developing world. It will focus on what is sustainable transport and how does this look between the developing world and the developed world, of focusing on the UK and focuses on four cases: Mexico, Thailand, Brazil, and Singapore. So firstly, what is sustainable transport? As you can see there, the Brundtland Commission says that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future people and their own needs. In 1995, there was a report on sustainable transport which set out the three visions of what it should be. It should change people and the way they live, change the tech that's involved, and change the prices for the people. So in 2016, the UN issued a report into sustainable transport, and it basically provides advice on how the transport sector can advance sustainable development with poverty eradication at its core. It also sets out what sustainable transport is. You can see on the right there, it sort of outlines 6 points: as to be safe, affordable, accessible, efficient, resilient, and it needs to be green. It sets out that 1.24 million people are killed in road accidents across the globe, and it sets out that it talks about urban sprawl and the private car use, which we'll be covering later on. So focusing quickly on policy that's in the UK, it's led by MPPF, which focuses on implementing sustainable applications, and it assists planning authorities in making the choice in favour of sustainable travel. Local plans are, as what they say, they're more local. Eastleigh, for example, has a local plan, and it focuses on the problems within the area and how sustainable transport can improve modal choice. Larger scales, such as HS2, are delivered via things like the NSIPs, which is the Nationally Significant Infrastructure Projects. The government released a report in 2016 covering 5 years, which sets out what sustainable transport they hope to implement. there's a lot of land use planning and TODs, which is transport orientated development, which focuses on land and areas which are geared up really in how sustainable transport can be provided, focusing on sites that are orientated around railways, bus stops, etc. Then to actually implement the sustainable transport infrastructure, you need funding. Throughout the UK, one way for this is to use LEP funding, which is Local Enterprise Partnership, which authority working in partnership will bid on what they want to implement. So focusing on developing countries, so I skipped a slide. These can be large-scale, cross-border plans, such as the South East Europe plan that focuses on the Balkan regions, Albania, Serbia, etc. Also the Africa Transport Policy Programme, which in its name focuses on Africa. These plans focus on the need to provide sustainable transport, which is pro-poor and pro-growth, so tries to raise the economy in the poor areas by providing sustainable transport. In developing countries, politics can be a barrier when trying to implement sustainable transport. Kenya, as an example, they've got numerous departments which all focus on one specific area of transport, and rather focusing as a whole, that they all keep their interests separate, and it's extremely hard to implement anything large scale. Developing countries can use national events to start off plans. South Africa, for example, who hosted the World Cup in 2010, they implemented a vast high-speed rail network across the country, which formed their phase one of a 40-year plan in providing sustainable transport for the country. Rio as well in 2016, very similar. Historically, existing infrastructure hasn't been planned at all in developing countries, which has led to large urban sprawl and large populations in a small area in the bigger sort of towns, which makes implementing land use planning and large transport infrastructure rather hard. There's a general lack of strong local planning, which leads to a lot of areas which are really poor, and then other areas which are really wealthy. There is a good example, however, in Colombia, which has seen good use of local planning, and it says implemented, but it has implemented a world-class bus rapid transport system and a large infrastructure project for cycle infrastructure in the poorest parts of Bogota. So how developing countries can implement the transport infrastructure? It's by using PPP. It's been around in the developed world for a number of years now, and the developing world has been using it for about 20 years. That's a public and private partnership where it's funded by either side. Chile has used PPP to finance 26 highways, 10 airports, 5 mass transit systems, and it equates to 20% of all their infrastructure they've built since 1991. Some advantage of using PPP: improved service, spreads the risk from the public sector to the private companies as well, and it often means earlier and faster build time. Negatives, they have tended to be more expensive than public procurement. There was a report in 2006 which said that the infrastructure projects were 24% more expensive than those done via traditional public procurement. Often in developing countries, they're implemented with no regrets, which is where they're implemented and almost ignoring the negative sides in implementing that, and it's almost tough. They don't think about all the issues that could arrive until after it's implemented. This graph shows PPPUs in developing countries. It's still not consistent over which countries it chooses. You can see the green line represents upper middle GDP countries in the developing world, the red lower, and then the blue are the poorest developing countries in the world, which shows that PPP really hasn't been implemented in those countries.
So, the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy. So, the ITDP is a global non-profit organisation. It's been established to help facilitate change within cities and around the world to promote sustainable transport system. It was founded in 1985 by transport advocates in the US, and its purpose is to counteract the costly and environmentally damaging exports to developing countries. The purpose is also to counteract the dependence on private vehicles. It aims to promote walking, cycling and bus rapid transport systems, as well as working on parking reforms, traffic demand management, improving bus operators' margins and the global climate and transport policy. It also consults local governments' efforts to develop more sustainable transport, publishes the magazine Sustainable Transport, and produces bus rapid transport standards, and sits on the committee for the annual awards. Its mission statement is to promote sustainable and equitable transportation worldwide. And in its first 10 years, it successfully advocated for the redirection of lending activity from the World Bank. And this was huge because the World Bank generally focused on road projects, and now when they advocated it to move away from road projects and focus on bus rapid transits, this convincing the World Bank is convincing the government of those developing worlds, because that's where they get the funding from. So once they've convinced the World Bank, they've successfully helped establish bus rapid transits in Colombia, China, Indonesia, Argentina, Brazil, India, Mexico, as well as encouraging cycling in South Africa, Indonesia, California, Senegal, Ghana, Mexico, all these countries, and as well as modernizing the India's rickshaws. However, lately the focus has been on working with government organizations in developing countries to help reduce transport emissions, collisions, road fatalities, and how the basic mobility of the poor can be improved. So this goes back to the bus rapid transit. A car is very expensive in the developing world. For example, in Pakistan, a Nissan Micra, what you call like probably £500 car here, is probably worth £4,000 there. And they've implemented a bus rapid transit system from one city to another, from Islamabad to like Rawalpindi, which is quite a big commuter share town, and it's only costs like 20 rupees, which is like 10p a day. So the difference is huge for the poor people. And ITBP has worked on projects in Guangzhou and it's opened a 22.5 kilometer bus rapid transit system, and it was the first to directly connect to the amazing metro system, and includes a bike parking, and has the world's highest number of passengers, as well as the highest bus frequency and the longest BRT stations. And it was a lead technical advisor to the city. As well as Argentina opened its first BRT in 2011 as well, with 12 kilometers of dedicated lane. And the city also constructed more than 40 kilometers of bike lanes because of the advice from the ITTP. This one in 2008 in Ahmedabad in India, they opened their BRT system, and it was so popular that in 2011 that it grew 50 kilometers with over 130,000 passengers per day using it, just shows you the scale of it. And in non-motorized transit, Mexico City's bike share system opened as the largest in Latin America in 2010, initially attracting 10,000 users and more than 2,000 trips daily.
Okay, so the first case study that we're going to look at is Mexico City, which is one of the world's mega cities with a population of 21 million. There's 4.7 million vehicles registered to the city alone, and there's another 5 million in the surrounding state, which are generally used for commuting in. So all of those vehicles causes a huge amount of congestion, and Mexico City is actually the most congested city in the world, according to TomTom, which they produce like an index, and it generalises it. With the average commuter spending 227 hours in traffic every year, and they have an average speed in the peaks of 3 miles an hour. So because of all those vehicles travelling as slowly as they are, there's a huge issue around pollution. So in 2017, 97% of the year, ozone was above safe limits. And there's also these little buses, which are called Pisaros. There's 35,000 of those, which are used most days in Mexico City, and they alone pollute around 1.5 million tonnes of CO2 every year, because they're such old vehicles. So I've also got a little animation, which is hopefully going to open. So the main issue which Mexico City have experienced is that the rate of expansion has been exponential from 1950 onwards. So up until then, the density of development was quite high. So in terms of transport and so on, people were related quite closely to their jobs. But as that's gone on, about now, it basically explodes, which has meant that the travel demands have gone up massively, and at the same time, car ownership's increased significantly as well. So people are travelling further, and they're also using cars. So hence the sort of main issues that they're experiencing. How do I get back on that? There you go. Okay, so some of the solutions then that Mexico have looked at is they set up Metrobus in 2005, which has, I think, 4 or 5 routes now. Each route's capable of accommodating about 300,000 trips a day. So it's massive, but every route is over capacity every day. So cars are still used quite a lot. In 2008, they set up ProTram, which is a Mexican federal project which is designed specifically to do mass transit systems across the whole of Mexico. They're quite heavily involved in the metro investment, which is going forwards. In terms of pollution, they're trying to target that with no drive days. So when it gets really bad, they basically say no one's allowed to drive, or they sort of target specific number plates and so on, take them off the road for that day, which is fairly effective, but it's not really a long-term solution. And they're also, by 2028, hoping for a 40% fleet composition of hybrid vehicles, which is quite aspirational, but whether they reach that or not. And they're also looking at modernising the fleet of those Pisaros, because they alone produce a huge amount of pollution. And you can see up here, this is some of their new metro system. So by 2028, there'll be a further 200 kilometres of urban mass transit in the rail. And they're also looking at expanding the BRT network. This is a map of the BRT network at the moment, but they recently tried to implement a new route which was going to be really effective, but there was quite a lot of wealthy opposition to the route it was going to take, so they had to divert it. So it kind of shows that the politics are still quite influenced by wealth and so on. And then there's also a recent initiative which is a company called the City Fix, which is an NGO. They're trying to educate people around basically trying to get them out of their cars and into public transport, trying to get, I think, 11.5% modal shift in the next 10 years. So, yeah.
So the next case study we'll look at is Bangkok in Thailand. As a developing country, it's experienced a lot of congestion, a lot of urban sprawl, as you've seen in some of the images down there. So Bangkok's sort of urban planning was initially based upon a 1960 study titled the Litchfield Plan, which was a very sort of American-style way of urban planning, which had land uses very far apart from each other, so it's very dependent on private car use. So as a result of this, there's concerns of congestion, pollution. There was a 1971 Bangkok transportation study, which was a task force basis for research how can they influence sustainable transport strategies. This led to some suggestions of how to improve sustainable transport issues, but they wasn't very well received by the government at the time. So as a result, there was an office established in 2002, the Office of Traffic and Transport Policy, which looked to collaborate through the Bangkok central government. And essentially, they faced quite a lot of opposition from this office as they were looking at development of, say, Bangkok SkyTrain or a BRT system. But the central government opposed this as their main finance of transport solutions was a predict and provide basis. They would only want to spend money on hardcore infrastructure, building new roads, linked with highways, which they don't want to spend money on public transport or schemes for non-motorised users. Just going to run on to the next one. And then the second case study is Curitiba in Brazil. So if you don't choose geography, you're probably sick to death of this. But in the 1960s, it experienced a mass rapid population growth due to employment migration. Again, this led to urban sprawl. There was inadequate transport infrastructure to cope with this. So as a result, there was local government intervention with the mayor developed a city master plan and focused on 5 key corridors for a BRT. As you can see in the top image there. So they linked to core economic employment areas to reduce commuting traffic and has approximately a patronage of about 2 million passengers. It's integrated with other transport systems, so it links to other bus routes in terms of timetabling and pricing. And this is really an example of long-term planning, as this master plan was initially established in the 1970s and 45 years on, it's still going today.
Okay, so the last case study is Singapore, which we're looking at because it's gone through quite a very quick development in the last 50 years, so it's gone from developing to developed in that time. And it's kind of quite a good example of how to do it relatively successfully. So in the last 10 years, the congestion levels in Singapore haven't really changed that much. They've just basically kind of remained fairly constant as they've invested in other things. So originally when Singapore became independent in the 1960s, there was a huge amount of kind of informal slum living and so on. The government reacted to that by putting up a lot of very dense housing, but they didn't put it near the employment areas. So they ended up with huge travel demand between those areas and the historic centre where all the jobs were. So in 1968, they set up the Ministry of Communications, which was basically designed to set up 10-year plans for transport and land use planning integrated with each other. And they basically acknowledged that if they didn't do that, they would restrict their GDP growth, which had been exponential. In 1971, they released their first plan, and the idea was concentric rings of development, and they would connect those into the core by sort of corridors of, I think initially it was car traffic. And then 1991, they started trying to take out some of the employment areas and put them more kind of constellation ideas, so you connect the dots, but basically take some of the jobs out of the centre. And then 2001 onwards, they've invested very heavily in heavily in rail and so on. So they've basically gone from 93 kilometres of urban rail to 500 kilometres. And at the same time as investing in public transport, they've also restricted car ownership. So they've got a quota system, so you basically have to bid for the right to own a vehicle, as well as having road pricing and area licensing as well. But they basically acknowledged that they had to have a restraint, they had to have a good public transport system, so it's all linked together. And now when they build new developments, this one's called Tenga, which is a huge new development going forward, and from day one it will have mass rapid transit into it as well. So they're sort of taking it all together and moving forward.
So yeah, essentially in summary, general transport is a key tool to mitigating issues regarding congestion, pollution and uncontrolled urban sprawl. So there's been a recognition on a global scale from the UN and non-profit organisations such as ITDP that these issues need to be combated against. So we've done some various case studies of Mexico City's very early stages, very reactive transport policies. Obviously Singapore's a very advanced state now. Essentially, in terms of making sure these policies succeed, intervention from government is key in terms of initial support for it, but primarily finance for these schemes.
Okay, thank you very much, Group 6. Probably realise you're slightly overrun, but we've still got time for one or two questions. Anybody who would like to start off?
Yeah, mine was the case study with Mexico. We're saying, like, I was just thinking of London, where London has about 7 million people, and already the traffic and public transport is sort of over-congested. Do you think for Mexico it's a bit too late, where there's not really anything that can be done?
Well,
Everything's already built?
they're kind of still, so Singapore is kind of, they're planning forward. So sort of 1980 they were planning forward rather than kind of trying to react to a problem. Mexico is still kind of at a stage where they're reacting to a problem. So they've got all the pollution, they've got a massive travel demand in terms of the influx from the outside every day. So they are trying to fit some of these systems. The trouble is that on the sort of BRT side of things, every time they open a new route, it immediately is fully occupied basically. So they're still kind of reacting to it, but I think if they can do similar to Singapore, where they sort of switch from reactive to thinking more long term, then they might be able to do a bit better.
I was going to say, again on Mexico, similar city, LA would face like very high traffic issues, and they introduced high occupancy toll lanes. Do you think that could be a potential solution for Mexico?
I think it possibly could be. I think they're part of the issue. They potentially could look at something a bit more like the T-charge, maybe, because a lot of their issues stem from the pollution side of things, hence the no drive days and so on. And they've got quite an old vehicle fleet, so particularly the buses, these things, they're sort of 30-year-old buses. So I think if they manage to sort of modernise the fleet, then they might be able to make public transport a bit more attractive. And that maybe draw people across that way as well.
Any other questions or comments? Well, I'll wrap up with one then. So, a couple of presentations, quite a lot of stress was put on with bus rapid transit. How sustainable is bus rapid transit?
It's more sustainable than the car.
So, yeah, that's a fair enough answer. So, Curitiba, what's one of the biggest industries in Curitiba? Well, who's the world's biggest exporter of buses? Do you know which country it is?
No.
It's Brazil. Where's one of the world's biggest bus factories? Curitiba. So there are other reasons why it went for that particular system, and it may not be may not be quite as sustainable as it first appears if you do a whole life cycle cost analysis, and particularly with respect to the manufacturing, all concentrated there. So always dig a bit deeper into the information. Okay, right, that's fine. Group 6, I know somebody's got to get off. Thanks very much. We're jumping in order. I think it's Group 4 on air and sea transport now, so they'd like to come up. I'll see whether I can get your presentation up. That's it, yeah. Apologies about the lack of screen, which I explained. There we are. But it should work okay. So if you start off now, I'll be timing you and keeping an eye on the clock. I've got your presentation, so I'll know we're going to be massively overrunning. But off you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our topic for today's presentation is how might developments in air and sea transport contribute to sustainable transport. We are starting with air transport. Air transportation is playing a vital role in sustainable transport system. It is currently carrying over 4 billion of people and 56 million tons of freight. Aircrafts burn 3 million tons of aviation fuel per year and produce 300 million tons of GHG gases. Over past 50 years, global demand for air travel has risen by 9% per year, and for the next 20 years, 3 to 7% growth has been predicted. On the other side, we can see the traffic growth in airlines in different continents in 2015. For contributing in sustainable transport system, it is important firstly to find out the problems and the issues which needs to be mitigated. Current environmental challenges faced by air transportation are carbon dioxide emission from aircrafts, increasing nitrogen dioxide and PM10 emission from engine, peak oil pricing, increased size of ecological footprint, especially for short-haul aircrafts noise, exceeding of local air quality regulatory limits. On the other side, we can see the illustration how greenhouse gas emission could be reduced by 80% by collecting the waste, recycling them, separating them, and mixing them with traditional jet fuel oil. Environmental development towards sustainability by air transportation. Use of carbon fiber composites, especially on the wings, to decrease aircraft weight and improve fuel efficiency. Electric propulsion system for short and medium haul aircrafts to maximize fuel efficiency. Reducing carbon dioxide by using blend of biofuel, targeting 80% usage compared to traditional fuel by end of 2020. Introducing free route airspace to improve efficiency and reduce emission. Now the free route airspace means allowing the aircraft to plan more efficiently, more direct route with stable trajectories, which would save travel time and reduce emissions as well. Implementing circular economy. Circular economy is the concept where products are designed to last longer, minimizing the use of primary material and reducing waste production. Achieving risk undermining progress through emission cuts, which indicates decreasing carbon dioxide emission by 42% in 2050 compared to 2000 and about 50% between 2050 and 2100. Economical development by air transportation and economical issues. Air transportation is currently supporting 65.5 million of global jobs directly and indirectly. We can see on the other side which represents the number of jobs and GDP. Every 100 million of spending on construction project generates additional GDP benefits of 70 million year after year. Globally coordinated carbon charge, which would raise 40 billion per year by 2020 and reduce demand and carbon dioxide emission by 5%. Now the key economical challenges which are faced by aviation, those are balancing between socio-economic benefits and environmental cost, price of oil and financial turndown, ongoing growth in demand.
Continuing talking about economic and developments with sustainability, if you see the chart or the figure, specifically if we look at the EU countries, there is an increase in the growth rate each year by 3.4. This means if there is a high demand and there is more passengers, we need more flights. This means more consumption of fuel. So it's expected in the 20 years the demand would increase by 3.4 each year, and it's expected in 2036 aviation would see over 7 billion passengers and supporting almost 100 million of jobs and economic activity almost 6 trillion pound. Moving to social development, we have 3 points about pharmaceutical industry, which is relying on air transport very heavily to move drugs, to move treatments, especially for long distances. Also, aviation plays a role in responding to disasters and emergencies. So Airlink was established to help coordinating responses for emergencies by air transport industry, which is currently providing almost 80% non-profit organization and links with 35 organizations. If we look at the chart, there is, especially for air transport, there is difference between gender equality. So the females only represent 41% of employees in air transport or aviation. Talking about pilots, female only represent 5.5 of pilots globally. So there is a need for development for that. Finally, we are talking about policies. The use of sustainable alternative fuels. Hopefully by 2020 we will see over a million flights running by alternative fuels around the globe. International Air Transport Association has set targets for fuel efficiency improvement and cut emissions. So 1.5% average annual improvement in fuel efficiency and cut the emission by 50% in 2050 compared to 2005 level. ICAO have also agreed a global goal for carbon neutral growth from 2020 and the goal of annual fuel efficiency 2% each year until 2050. Talking about EU countries, emission trading system, EU ETS, has also targeted greenhouse gas emissions to reduce by 20% in 2020 and at least 40% of by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Specifically about this country, under the Climate Change Act 2008, the target is to reduce the emission from UK aviation by 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. Finally, aviation has adopted the world first global carbon mechanism, ICAO carbon offsetting and reduction scheme. So every airport needs to report their emissions, CO2. That's it. We are moving to sustainable transport.
Sea transport accounts for approximately 80% of international trade, and there's about 85,000 registered vessels around the world. The industry itself uses 330 metric tons of marine fuel, when 77% of that is heavy fuel. And if you look at the map here, it shows the most regular routes, so you can see a lot in the Atlantic and a lot between the Pacific Island countries.
We know that when we're talking about sustainability, there's been a few revolutions for the sea transport industry. The main one being the introduction of containerisation, not just for reducing the cost of transport and communication as shown in this graph over here. It's come down from 1930 to 2005 by a dramatic amount. But also in standardising the industry, increasing the lifespan of the perishable goods and dramatically improving the efficiency of sea trade.
So I'm going to talk about the current issues and challenges. So sea transport is a lifeline of Pacific island countries. Many of them rely on this for the transport of their goods and services. It's crucial for the economic development in those countries, and virtually no other economic development can happen unless the shipping industry goes well. There's current problems like the ships are often old and poorly maintained, and there's a cycle where these ships get replaced by older ships as well. Although operating costs are quite low, they use quite a lot of fossil fuels, and it's predicted over time that these costs might maintain the same, so government industries and donors will have to subsidise these routes. And there's the growing trend that there's a massive growth in demand rather than the growth in efficiency. So moving forward, for example, a low carbon future, there's many techniques. So you could just simply improving energy efficiency help bring carbon emissions down, and using renewable energy such as solar and wind, and I'll talk about biofuels as well, and liquefied natural gas. So in terms of policies, International Marine Organization handles all the safety and security issues regarding international shipping. So there's been stuff like the Marshall Plan. So they aimed for 20% reduction in fuels by 2020, and also measures such as the Energy Efficiency Design Index, where by 2025, there was 40% less fuels. Ship needs to be 30% more energy efficient than ships built in 2014, as well as ship energy efficiency management plan. And there was also other conventions such as the London Convention Protocol and the Hong Kong Shipping Recycling Convention, which actually didn't go ahead as it's not, as of 2017, it only had 7 out of 15 signatures that it needed. And in terms of promoting sustainability through ports, there was a directive by the EU which aimed by 2010 all ships had a concentration of 0.1% of sulfur fuels by when they reach the EU ports, and this could be seen in the Mediterranean where 66% of ships, but there was 66% decrease in sulfur dioxide concentrations from ships reaching the EU.
So if we're looking at further developments, one of the biggest problems we noticed was ship breaking, but this actually is a massive moneymaker for quite a lot of low economically developed countries. For Bangladesh, the ship breaking industry rolls in an annual turnover of 1.5 billion. So therefore, to ensure that sustainable sea transport can take place, shipbuilders must also account for the impact of ship breaking and the end of a ship's operating lifespan. Again, the shipbreaking industry is a major supplier of steel, an important part of the economy for these developing nations such as Bangladesh, India and Pakistan. Unfortunately, despite the benefits it holds as part of the circular economy, as we spoke about earlier, it continues to undermine the industry's contribution to sustainable development. As the issue is raised further, it has led to a design for recycling concept, much like that exists in the automobile industry, whereby the shipbuilders identify potential hazards such as toxic paint or inefficiencies like oil tanks that must be manually cleaned before recycling. In terms of the people that take part in shipbreaking, understanding their needs as well is important. The ships can also be designed in such a way that rungs and ladders are provided to assist with shipbreaking when they come to the end of their life cycle. And also techniques such as standardisation of all parts and equipment on every ship to make it easier to identify the components of end-of-life ships for potential reuse, remanufacturing or recycling. Also, in terms of how the ships operate, the application of hybrid electric engines can provide enormous benefits for the shipping industry. An example of that is the Queen Mary II, which was at the time in 2004 the largest passenger liner. It uses 4 diesel engines and 2 gas turbines that all produce electricity. This arrangement allows for more accurate steering when also producing much less vibration and noise than conventional drives, where propellers are usually connected directly to the diesel engines. Additionally, such advantage of the hybrid electric engines in shipping means that the emissions are reduced. This is because more operations of the ICE, internal combustion engine, can perform at close to their optimal output. Another example, in 2009, a parallel hybrid tugboats used in California They're able to operate using electric motors alone, and also electric motors and a diesel drive when working. So just to explain, the difference between a series and a parallel hybrid is that diesel produces electricity for mechanical power in a series engine, whereas the hybrid is able to use both simultaneously. This is important as it's good to understand where or how these ships operate. So for when tugboats aren't actually towing large ships and just performing quite mundane tasks, they're able to switch their electric motor and produce obviously less emissions. Hybrid shows significant reduction for pollutants related to combustion efficiency. So there's a reduction of 73% for particulate matter and 51% for nitrogen oxides, with reductions of 27% for fuel-related pollutants.
So in terms of looking at other alternatives, we have to actually assess whether these uses can actually be practical. So the shipping sector is actually looking for reducing sulfur levels through refining fuels, and this can be done at the oil refinery. However, this actually adds more cost and actually increases CO2 emissions. Also, they can use liquefied natural gas, but again, this requires fitting new engines on the ships and pressurized fuel storage tanks, which again adds increasing operating costs. So biofuels actually have low sulfur dioxide, low sulfur levels and low CO2 levels, and they meet all the policies set by different worldwide organisations. However, there's a current challenge of not knowing how to actually get the most and apply biofuels in developing nations and even developed nations. And currently the cost of biofuels is actually higher than fossil fuels, but we predict that over time, as new technologies, usually when it comes in, it's more expensive. As more research will be done, the cost of biofuels will go down and the fossil fuels will be drawn out. So, for example, you can see now that, as I said, they need 330 metric tons of fuel, but currently biofuel can, as of 2016, could only produce 26 metric tons. So obviously there's a large discrepancy, and even with the projectors now, they can only go up to 5 to 50 to 54 metric tons of fuel. The references. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. So, any questions for Group 4?
Yeah. Oh, in terms of the air travel, do you think in terms of freight travel will be any drone technology implemented, say, smaller return trips?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
For the air sector, do you think for freight travel there'll be any drone technology implemented? Because I think in Southampton, between, I know it's very flexible geographic distance between GP surgeries and hospitals.
Yes.
Transfer medicine by drone technology. Is that something you think?
Yeah,
on a bigger scale?
yeah, it can be implemented in order to make freight services, but I think it needs a few more time to implement in the developed and developing countries as well, because for drone services you need a huge amount of freight to transport from one side to another, so might be it need a few more time properly to.
Just a little comment to that, actually, that you were saying. In terms of sort of, especially in the for medical use, drones have been used a lot more in developing countries already, like in Rwanda, they're using it to move blood samples and everything, to move blood about and medicines about, because the roads aren't there, you know, whereas here in Rwanda they're using it to save lives, whereas here it's just to, you know, to make it quicker, make it cheaper. So I mean, they have been used a lot more in developing countries rather than in developed countries already.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of issues surrounding that in terms of sort of like policy and obviously around where they're able to fly in UK airspace and stuff like that. It's one of the issues that have to overcome before more wide scale drone use sort of comes in, I guess.
So I guess my question will be a general one, which might have been tackled if you had a concluding slide. So why has air and sea transport proved so difficult to become more sustainable?
Well, one of the issues that we noticed in terms of sea travel is that there's a lot of conflict between profits that need to be made by these companies that are transferring. So one of the issues that they could have tackled was for ships to travel at slower speeds in order to improve the efficiency and reduce the environmental damage, but that doesn't go down too well with the operators and stuff, so it's hard to sort of get that through. There's always going to be different policies in different countries that these sort of vehicles are operating in, so yeah, it's hard to sort of quite manage them all and get all like standardised.
I think like one big problem will be the actual bulk and amount of goods that are transported by air and sea. It's difficult to separate these products into smaller distribution methods. I guess if one country, for example, a lot of landlocked states would need their goods provided through a larger shipment. I guess countries could work together, even though they did have their own shipping industries, to work together to move goods together, which would just produce less trips, and the movement of goods will be a lot more at one time.
Okay, yeah, well clearly commercial imperative may not always be in line with environmental objectives. But what about the international dimension? So aviation and sea transport, the vast majority of the movements are international. What problems does that cause in terms of trying to make the systems more sustainable?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, what about the international feature of aviation and sea transport? Why does that make it making them sustainable more difficult?
I guess you need everyone to agree on one thing, rather than having different things for just regional basis. You need everyone to agree for one sustainable act, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the problem is that there's always going to be an incentive to cheat on the regulations.
Yeah.
So if you regulate, you can only use expensive clean fuel in the UK. Well, you go and you refuel someplace else.
Yeah, of course.
And that's so getting the international agreements, the Warsaw agreements, etc., that drive international air traffic. That's been quite problematic.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Kyoto Agreement in 1997, international aviation and international shipping weren't included. It was too difficult to even contemplate.
Yeah, no, we did see there was a lot of issues, particularly with ownerships of like shipping routes and stuff like that, like the Suez Canal. Yeah, just that in itself just presents an issue on ownership and who can use it. Yeah, so it's just about getting everyone on board, which is, like you just mentioned there, easier said than done.
Okay, any other questions or comments? So I'll just end with the comments. If it was a group of aero engineers or ship scientists, there would have been some different things they might have mentioned. So aero engineers might have talked about changes in fuselage design, so that tube and wings, it's not that aerodynamic, and a blended wing type aeroplane would be much more aerodynamic, but it means you wouldn't have any windows, or not very many windows. So would users accept that? Open rotor engines are another thing that may well improve the efficiency of aviation. With shipping, there may be that 21st century sail ships might come into play. Solar energy, compressed natural gas, things like that. Then a couple of things that are on the environmental side with shipping that you wouldn't think about: the ship surface treatment to stop fouling, from barnacles, etc. Well, those are quite nasty toxins, and there's had to be a lot of regulations about those, but difficult to enforce. And also the ballast system, where basically ships take on board water when empty to ballast and then dispose of it. Quite often on the other side of the world, that causes a lot of ecological disturbance.
I think that was, I can't remember exactly, but in the Hong Kong one they talked about ship recycling, how it causes a lot of injuries and stuff when it's when they're getting recycled.
Yeah, well, you mentioned ship breaking, so that's another aspect. Of course, another feature of why particularly shipping industry is difficult to get sustainable. Those vessels have a very long life because they're big investments, and therefore it means that the new technology is going to take quite a time to work its way through the world's fleet. Now, in the lecture I gave last week on road transport technology, if any of you went and looked on Blackboard, I had a few slides at the end which looked at technologies in other sectors. I think I've got a slide with some stuff about blended wings and open rotor engines, etc. Anyway, so Group 4, thanks very much for your time. And now we'll move on to Group 5, who I think are one person down.
We are one person.
Now it's up to you how I will adapt my marking schema to take that into account. It's up to you how you deal with that. You can skip the slides, you can cover
leave
the...
them in and just... So they're there, so people know they're there, and if they want to go look at them up, they can go look them up. But we don't know anything about it, she told us yesterday she's in. So don't... Anything about air travel, we haven't got...
This one, isn't it? You number 5?
Yeah.
Here it comes, yeah. There you go. Okay, Group 5, off you go.
Okay, so we are going to be covering the opposite to the previous, and we are going to be talking about sustainable transport in developed countries. So we're going to give a brief overview on transport and in the developed world, and then we're going to really focus on the modes and see how they've changed. Like I said, air travel. We're missing our human who knows about our air travel, so we'll leave them in. So people, if you're interested, please go on Blackboard and have a look. But we don't know a lot about them and haven't had a chance to really review them. So we start?
Okay, so one of the main drivers of sustainable travel changes that cities can do is with regards to policies. So if you just have a quick background of previously what was done. So the sort of recent EU white paper sort of seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60%, and with that EU white paper that will then get filtered down to all the other, so that will then they'll have like the NPPF for England will have the national framework policy, which will then sort of take into account the EU white paper's aims and then try to do that nationally. That will then get broken down again to sort of like the London plan and the local plans, which will then sort of seek to follow those aims. So with recent policies that have sort of changed towards the sustainable transport, some of the main ones are sort of the new London plan, sort of seeks to have a healthy streets approach. So with this is what London are now doing is they're actually going around to other consultancies and developers and actually teaching them how to now do TAs and create new developments properly, and sort of we're prioritising sort of walking and sustainable mode, and we are sort of the modelling where before with a lot of TAs they were very car orientated and making sure that the vehicle capacity on the network was always sort of manageable, whereas now we're seeking to sort of decentralise car travel and promoting walking and cycling a lot more. And again with like Oxford City Centre, they're now actually aiming to try and make Oxford City Centre car free, and they're trying to get rid of the fossil fuels first. So they're sort of planning to be one of the first cities to be car free totally. And again with other sort of recent policies which are all sort of relating to sort of reduce pollution is there's new sort of advice notes on guidance with regards to how to actually better design, whereas before with a lot of the design manuals, again they were very car orientated and designed for pedestrians and cyclists were an afterthought of design, whereas now there's a lot more guidance on more focus on the cyclists and on pedestrians, and they should be the first thought. So with regards to active travel, so firstly, these are sort of almost indirect impacts that have had a benefit on sustainable travel within cities. So a lot of these are sort of more the way how the internet has played a massive part, and other technologies have actually had a massive part within the cities. Whereas, and providing with the cities actually providing the information of bus timetables and their bus journey times freely, people have been able to make apps which are then a lot more beneficial to people being able to work out their routes a lot more easier. And again, there's other sort of schemes that cities are sort of trying to do, such as car clubs, which are then sort of trying to move from your own personal ownership of a car to more of a shared ownership, and actually trying to promote shared travel. And again, there's sort of other list of how some of these can actually remove the car trips. There's other schemes as well, which such as like beat the streets, where it's where you can track your walking and cycling a lot more easier. And also what they do is, over the summer months, they actually have a competition with other companies within the cities. So they're actually sort of adding in a bit more competition to actually help promote walking and cycling, and they also provide prizes as a reward. So this is just a quick showing of how the introduction of more accessible vehicles have actually affected the percentage of cyclists within Dutch cities. So before, in like 1940, there was a massive percentage of people travelling by bike, but as cars were more accessible, were cheaper, you can see there's a rapid decrease in cycling. But now a lot of places such as like Amsterdam, where they're going and they're promoting cycling a lot more with their designs, all of that's actually, they're now starting to increase their cycling percentages, but a lot of the cities are still very car orientated. This is just providing a few quick statistics of the walking and cycling in England, and with some of the cities included. And what this is sort of showing is not many people walk or cycle in England, and it's saying that this is sort of what a lot of other these statistics are what are now influencing policies on our driving change to try and make people change. Because it's saying in England no one walks for 10 minutes or cycles. 20% of people don't do it within England on a monthly basis. So this is what's happening with Cambridgeshire. So what Cambridge are doing is they are now, even though their network capacity is over capacity, they are now actually doing designs which are making car driving worse, but are actually sort of following the Dutch method of junction design, and are actually sort of putting cyclists and pedestrians first. The issue with some of these designs are the council's designs, whereas there's still a lot of miscommunication between, if the developer was designing these, they would still have to make sure that all the vehicles are actually able to, there's no impact on the actual car drivers. And then here are a few of the limitations right now in especially England cities with regards to cycling. So there's just an example of the parking outside Cambridgeshire's railway. So although you can promote cycling, there's not actually enough facilities, secure facilities for people to actually park their bikes right now. And still there are a lot of junctions which are very car orientated, and they don't really make walking and cycling an attractive proposition. And with regards to railways. So this is sort of just a quick overview of the statistics of railways. So right now with a lot of other mode shares within sort of London City and over England have actually decreased, so railways are actually improving. So all the changes that they're doing actually with transit orientated developments, making people actually promoting the railways, is actually improving now. And it is beneficial because railways with the mode of transport actually produce the least amount of emissions, and they actually have the least amount of environmental impact compared to the other modes. So again, this is sort of showing the deaths in Germany, just showing that if you're travelling by rail compared to car or bus, there's a significant decrease in the amount of accidents caused. And again, the one at the end is the pollution and how in the daytime and the night time, showing that railways are still a lot lower than other modes of transport. So again, so with like what England have actually, what they have been doing around in England is they have been electrifying and changing from diesel railways to electric. And right now, currently, of the England network, 34% has now become electrified, which has then had an impact on the amount of greenhouse gases now emitted. Again, here are a few of the limitations. So the chart is showing what impact railway has compared to other modes of transport to the actual environmental impacts. So it's showing that railway is the lowest of all modes, and that road and cars are significantly higher, which is what the most people currently use. A few of the limitations on the railways is potentially if there's a breakdown or accidents, you can't really, there's no alternative routes. You're actually going to be essentially ruining the route for your passengers, whereas for other modes of transport there are alternative routes you can go if one section of the route is broken down. The other issue is the infrastructure that is required is very long term, and it requires a lot of planning, such as, well, as HS2 is sort of an example, is the years it takes to actually sort of start building it is a lot longer than if you're just improving a road. That is it for.
Right, so cars are still one of the most common forms of transport in developed countries. As we heard earlier, 62% of trips are by car, and this is problematic given how polluting cars can be, especially if there's only one passenger in cars, in a car, and due to the sort of carbon dioxide, NOx, SOx and particulates which they give off, there's a lot of impact on human health. I found a recent study that found that the cost to the NHS of different cars per year, so for a diesel car every year £258 the NHS needs to spend per diesel car, and then of course most cars are either petrol or diesel despite the new technologies, so most cars on the roads are fossil fuels and therefore polluting ones. And this is a table I found comparing the different forms of transport. So as you can see, a large car with just a single passenger is the most polluting form of transport here, even worse than planes on the right hand side there. And it can be significantly decreased with more passengers and smaller cars, but still cars are the most polluting form of transport there aside from planes. And that's problematic in developed countries because so many people own cars and people like using their cars for convenience, and they like owning them. And here is another table. this is from Bristol, which shows a breakdown of the different vehicles that were being used on major roads around Bristol, and they found on cars here far and away the biggest form of transport around Bristol. So yeah, it's a big issue that many developed cities have to deal with. So we've heard in last week's lecture about alternative fuel sources, so I didn't want to go extensively into it, but things like electric and hybrid cars are becoming more common, although they're currently still rare compared to the fossil fuels of petrol and diesel. But as technology is improving, sort of the charging points and the support for these vehicles is increasing, so they're likely to have increasing uptake, and with new technology that should increase it more. So gradually we should be seeing more of these on the road, which is obviously better for greenhouse gas production in the cities, and also as developed countries try to move to more renewables, it'll be better for greenhouse gas production overall, as the electricity should hopefully not be producing so much CO2. So here, cities have been trying to reduce the number of cars and control the number of cars in cities. So as we heard earlier, congestion charges are one way that's been used to reduce the number of cars going around. So London, Singapore and Stockholm all have charges for vehicles entering the cities, as we heard. With the electric and other cars with low CO2 are exempt from those, which of course is encouraging more electrics again, so it's another factor hopefully moving towards the newer technology. They can be contentious. I saw that I think New York was having a debate a couple of years ago, and that was turned down eventually after some debate. But then they can be used to fund other transport, so other public transport can benefit from having a congestion charge, so it will help fund the alternative options, which should further get more cars off the road, which is a good aim. We can try and get other techniques we heard earlier, active traffic management, which reduces pollution and helps sort of organise the cars. It attempts to sort of mitigate the effects of car travel with controlling the speed, and that will allow lower pollution if they need to. Adjusting traffic light frequencies. I saw Barcelona was using traffic control, so they'll, when traffic is particularly bad, they'll be able to control the traffic lights to help keep the flow going, so there's less time stuck in traffic, which will release more pollution. And as we heard earlier, the journey planning apps, which are helping people find alternatives to using their car, so they'll see bus routes, cycling routes, walking if they want to walk instead. So all of that's helping to get cars off the road, which is what we want, due to their high pollution levels.
Okay, so buses, arguably the most unattractive mode. But, quick history. So this is kind of a general history, mainly based on American development, but it's kind of regular in developing countries. So we start with an omnibus, which was a typical horse-drawn carriage type deal, kind of the first thing to actively carry a number of people. These were sometimes carrying up to 42 people in larger scenarios, originating in Paris and places like England in 1829, but they were very uncomfortable, and people people loved them, but they were very uncomfortable. So then we move on to the horse car, which utilised the introduction of the railroad and using that as a means to move people a bit quicker, still utilising horses, so there is some constraint on physical limitations. This is what they've started to see, was that they had to keep up the horses, where why can't we just use the body of the vehicle? So then we move on to a cable car, very famously known in San Francisco, utilising the hills and a cable-drawn system. They, over time, were found to be very unsafe, but updating over time and utilising more technology, this got a lot safer, and now these are implemented everywhere, and you'll still see these around today. We then move on to streetcars, much more looking like a bus, still utilising some kind of infrastructure on the road instead of just plain roads, kind of like a tram now. These were first buses to be powered by any conventional means, and they helped fuel the onset of rapid transport and really got people into commuting. And then we have typical modernisation. So this is now what we know to be a bus. Over time, these have developed in terms of capacity and whatever, but they are generally now the same. They are now considered to be a very highly interesting vehicle. They should be used a lot more. They aren't, especially in developed countries that we're talking about. Lots of these are dense cities. We haven't got the capacity to park our cars anymore as more get on the road. So, like I said, trying to reduce cars. Hopefully we can shift people to more sustainable modes. But buses are not the most commonly used mode. People don't tend to like it. But these could very much improve cost and sustainability in general. In terms of the future, the main push towards buses is clean energy. If we can get clean energy up and running, hybrid buses, electric buses, then they will be much more highly used and we can restore our fleets with more sustainable modes. And hopefully, with the uptake of more sustainable travel versus car use, then there will be modes for the people to go to. For example, Los Angeles have plans to switch their entire fleet to zero-emission buses by 2030, and the similar aim is in the EU. 25 countries aim to replace 2,500 buses with electric modes by 2020. So, in general, the uptake is mainly commuting. We see most people using buses to commute to work. It makes most sense, especially in cities, especially in high-density cities, and they, in general, connect most large working nodes in the city. Leisure is less used, more of our daytime users, but it is limited to shopping. Quite a lot of other active modes, so if you wanted to go out for a day with a family, generally buses don't reach destinations that you might typically want to go to. But shopping is a definite ease of use because of just the connections and the interchanges we have. And international travel, generally limited to coach-type travel across bodies of land, such as Euroline, who do kind of holiday goers between Europe and London. So, as I said, there are significant limitations. Routing, so we are restricted to what is already set out, what schedules we have. They might not go far enough, they might not drop off. You might have to change the way you're going to walk. So, say if we wanted to get from, here to somewhere else, we could take a bus, but we might not reach as far as we need to, so we might have to walk, or we might have to pick up another mode. So not the best, but if interchanges can be introduced, then this could be improved. Yeah, convenience, again, set on set schedule, so you need to align how you're going to be with your bus, so you might have to go early, you might have to go a bit later. So you have to work with timetabling. Privacy, everyone hates buses, there's no privacy. You hear conversations you don't want to hear. But arguably they are good in terms of capacity. Improving this could potentially be a key, but obviously you are restricted in personal space, you are going to be sitting with other people, so that is one problem that buses do have that unfortunately is quite hard to get over. And space, so there is limited space, you can only carry so many people safety-wise, but we also have limited space now for specialised needs like wheelchairs or prams, because quite often if we're getting lots of people, they utilise that space, and so we can't take everybody on the bus, so that is also a problem. But there are opportunities. Like we said, if we move away from cars, we need to move something else. Buses are a good alternative, so improving design so we can adapt our design for different modes. You see a lot more ramps, quick, very easily used. This type of bus, Mercedes-Benz Citroën G City Bus, they have a really cool thing where it will pull up, and as you can see from it pulling up to you, you can see lights to show you where to get on different doors on the bus, like a Unilink bus where there's 2 different doors. It will show you which one's the least congested and where the seats are, and there are lights to indicate where available seats are, so you don't have to keep looking. Another key thing is capacity and passenger flow, so if you can increase the amount of passengers that are on it, it will be more of a utilised method because we can get more people on it and off it quick enough. So extra seating, county systems to see how many people are using it, and just adjust seating so we can accommodate the specialised needs. Safety and comfort is generally improving bus safety and working conditions, and improve obviously efficiency and performance of the bus, and hopefully that improves its attractiveness. And the main deal is electrification, so getting all our fleets to be electric or hybrid buses. This will ultimately deal with sustainability in terms of buses overall. For example, China have led a major leader in this area, and they've made a large step to adding lots and lots of electric buses to their fleet very rapidly. And for every 1,000 electric buses, the demand in fuel drops by 500 barrels a day, so they are drastically changing their fuel demand and consumption. So, air travel. Imagine another person stood here. So if you're interested, please go look at these, but we don't know enough about them to tell them to you without screwing up. But this will follow the same deal where there are opportunities, limitations and constraints. Generally looking at air travel, commuter and freight. So I'll skip these very carefully. But in summary, the developed world is very mobile. We are very mobile in what we do, but we do use a lot of cars. So we are now trying to be more sustainable. So progress is happening, like we said before, but we've made a lot of mistakes. So we are going through a process of, learning from our mistakes, implementing new technologies, and trying to see what is really optimal for different cities, because every city is different. There's not a lot of policy to force sustainability. We are kind of hoping that everybody starts to pick it up. So this will be largely driven if changes by economic advantages rather than policy. So if a bus is much more economically positive from electric, then that will be used versus a normal fuel. But technology is improving rapidly, but the investment and uptake is low. People still use high carbon modes. I like using my car. I'm not going to be sad about it. I don't like using a bus. Everybody is like this. So it's getting over those kind of interpersonal, personal reasons, and also really promoting the environmental costs and benefits to all the modes. But there is a massive variation in developed countries just based on funding, based on it's definitely a city by city basis. So that's pretty much it. I'll go for references. There we go. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions for Group 5? Ollie?
As Harry mentioned, there's some lack of communication between councils and developers for, say, new housing schemes. So at the moment, developers are required to pay a civil charge on their housing schemes to pay for community charge, so new bus stop, timetable, that sort of stuff. So in terms of, there's already a financial incentive to try and promote sustainable modes within housing development. I was thinking another step would be to kind of force developers to kind of take away car parking and get more sustainable modes.
With regards to the Healthy Streets one that has recently come out early this year, with the London plan, what that one proposes is that one is basically with new developments, they don't want any new roads basically being built. They only want shared streets, and along with the with a lot of other TAs as well that people do, is they're always trying to promote the development and saying everything good about it. Whereas this one, they want to say, they want also developers to focus on the bad parts of sustainable transport and how that could be improved. But that doesn't necessarily commit the developer to building it. So now it's sort of what they want is they want people to actually give the councils essentially ideas of how to promote everything. So that's how London is, and they're sort of hoping, they're going around also telling a few other larger cities how they're going about it, to hopefully get them to do it. I think the issue is, with a lot of issues, is Highways England don't focus on sustainable transport at all. They're only necessarily about their road capacity, and that's where some of these issues have come about, with a lot of the miscommunication on the same sort of goals.
You've got a follow-up question?
No, it's
Different one.
in terms of, say, travel management, in terms of, say, employees, do you think there should be a strong emphasis on the employers to enforce, say, parking charges, say, driving to work, driving in? Do you think that should be based on the employees or employers to be responsible for ensuring sustainability?
I think you have to base it on, hopefully sustainability is now so much in the public eye that you kind of got to hope that employees will start paying attention. But also, you know, if we really want to start driving change, we are going to have to take these policies like road pricing. No one really wants to do it, but it's really integral to try and make some change. So I think, I think employers definitely putting some kind of parking charge in, or, you know, promotion of not bringing your car in is definitely needed.
I was saying, I think it's also worth mentioning that there has been sort of research on it, and that within the UK, sort of transport is the worst polluting sector now for greenhouse gas emissions. And now what scientists are saying is, they're saying, if based on our current trajectory, if we don't change by 2030, there's going to be sort of irreversible damage. So I think it's sort of these changes have to be sort of like with what Cambridge are doing with their designs, which are now they're purposely forcing car drivers to have the worst journey. I think stuff like that sort of needs to start being changed to actually cause a change in people's behaviours of travel modes.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a combination of all sort of scales to really work. So employers, employees, raising awareness, incentivising, that sort of thing. Like car sharing at work, like we showed with the cars and the different pollution. So if two people live nearby and instead of both taking cars, they shared one car, that could be a huge effect in itself. So I think it's just all levels need to sort of work together for it.
With respect to road user charge, I think it was Matthew said that New York has had attempts to try and introduce it and failed, which is correct, but I think it's the legislation has gone through the New York State Legislature, and there might be a possibility that New York will introduce road user charging in 2021. So still some time off, and obviously the politics can happen to prevent that, but it would be quite interesting if an emblematic city of free market enterprise introduced road user charging. Of course, some of the road system, particularly between New York and New Jersey, is heavily tolled already. Any other questions, comments? So I'll ask my standard question, slightly different variant. Perry, home deliveries, are they sustainable?
No, they are not. No, I think that was sort of some of the issues where that sort of it's making it seem a fake sustainable, with like it's making the peak look a bit better with people not having to sort of go and travel to get the home deliveries, but it is causing a lot more pollution with vans. But what I know, what London are currently testing is they're testing with DPD, they're testing a bike, where the bicycle person, it can have up to 150 kilograms in the trailer, and then there's a motor in the trailer which will then actually allow the cyclist to essentially cycle as if they were cycling normally, and then be able to deliver. And what that will also do is that will then actually allow the vans or the bikes to be able to actually use the bus lanes within London, and be able to, sometimes if there's enough space, to go on the street, so they can actually improve deliveries that way. So that's sort of one of the routes they're going. The issue with that though is, if they make the trailer too large, I think there's a motor restriction before it can't be classed as a bike anymore, and then it has to be classed as a vehicle, which then they're back to going on the roads. But that's sort of one of the ways.
So I think Matthew showed a slide of Bristol and saw some. There's quite steep growth in light goods vehicle counts. That's partly due to the home delivery phenomenon. And we haven't focused too much in the course about white vans being an environmental pariah, but clearly they are not contributing to sustainability in their current configuration. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll stop there. We'll thank this group. Well done. So now it's the group has been most patient because they were bumped down the order. Sorry about that, guys. You didn't protest hard enough. gone into a different order. It's okay. I was panicking for a moment. The other thing you'll need to do, Group 2, I think I know who you all are, but I may have got some of your names jumbled up, so you just introduce your first name before you speak, okay? Okay, off you go.
Alright, so I'm Thibault. So we are going to talk about how might land-based public transport investment contribute to sustainable transport. But before that, as a quick introduction, transport has an important environmental impact, but is also a vital element of the economy. We've seen, and it's a fact, that slow progress to more sustainable transport has been made worldwide, but only 16% of travel are made by bus or rail. So it makes public transport a key issue on sustainability. So we are going to talk about sustainable transport, what it is and what it means, and then discuss about several ways to make public transport more sustainable. So where it is the increase of the use of public transport or the improvement of the network, increased efficiency, a shift towards renewable energy transport, but also transitional financial policies and instruments that can promote sustainable transport, as well as promoting green business and consumer behavior. So first of all, sustainable transport is the capacity to support the mobility needs of a society in a manner that is the least damageable to the environment and does not impair the mobility needs of the future generations. So there is clearly three major pillars on sustainability. First of all, the environmental one, which is to manage the consumption of energy and resources, link it to the social pillar that we have to grant people access to health, education, jobs and other services, and also the economic pillar, which is that we have to give people jobs and to make goods transportable for everyone. And public transport has a big focus on the environment and social pillars. So first of all, bus and rail have roughly a third of carbon impact of a car. Given this table, we can see that bus only emits 69 gram per person kilometer of CO2 equivalent, while a car emits 200 grams. Cars produce 60% of all transport carbon emissions. So increasing the use of public transport seems to be an efficient way to make transport more sustainable. So a solution would be to encourage people to use public transport. And so a lot of you could have seen it in Unilink buses. One double-decker takes up to 75 cars off the streets. So not only would it mean a decongestion, but also decarbonization of overall transport. This solution, so the increase of the use of public transport, is mostly is efficient in cities, because in rural areas the journeys are more efficiently traveled by car. So why do people don't use public transport? They give three major reasons to that. First, lack of regularity, lack of information, and habits. So a solution would be to improve the overall customer experience. So where it would be to ease the payments, so using contactless payment cards or a smart card that can be used in every company's of public transport. It would be to improve the accessibility, so more stops, access to disabled people, and a special focus on multimodal journeys, so building park and rides scheme, for example. It could be to raise the level of service, so longer routes or more frequent stops, as well as a better information for people To set a platform to centralize all information, and especially for intermodal journeys, to give the information where to change the mean of transport. Another way to increase the use of public transport would be to promote the use of it. So we could think about tax incentive policies, such as refund taxes for employers giving vouchers to employees using public transport, or even to make people try and maybe adopt public transport, which is the case in many cities and very efficient, such in Lyon in France.
I'm Sean. So, as we've said, if you improve the network, you get more people on public transport, which is more sustainable than private vehicles. There's a few hard improvements you can do, such as extending the network. The main problem with that is networks tend to go as far as they're financially sustainable, even though extending them may get environmental benefits. Additional transport modes could be used, for example, a tram even in Southampton city centre. If you're on the main high street, there's like at least 10 different bus routes that go down that one road. So if you replaced all of them with a tram, you'd then take off the diesel engines out of the area, and potentially, as for example the UK moves towards more renewable energy, it's cleaner and better for the environment. The other main hard improvement, which can sometimes be hard to do, is good planning. And a quote that summarises one of the problems by Owen is that you can't really make any transport thing sustainable without it being planned well, so that the zones, like so if you've got one commercial zone and one residential zone, then you've got quite an easy transport link, whereas if they're all spread out and you've got urban sprawl, it can be difficult. The other part of good planning is making sure, for example, you've got cycle facilities at train stations or bus stops, so that people can then do all of their journey by public transport or more active modes rather than just the one part on the train or bus. Soft improvements can be done. They can vary a lot by how sort of developed the country is. So, for example, less developed countries tend to have more safety and social issues why it's maybe not socially sustainable. So, for example, overcrowding on buses can be an issue. Harassment can be an issue in some countries, and even stuff as simple as in some countries it's not regulated and not all drivers have uniforms, so you don't know if you're getting on a regulated public provided bus or just a private one that could essentially do anything. In more sort of developed countries, if you invest in real-time information and mobility as a service, then this can sort of increase the ease of use and increase the awareness, which means people are more likely to use public transport. In addition to this, you've got bringing in Euro emission standards for both buses and taxis, because a lot of these will stop for a large amount of times, and most Euro 6 engines have start-stop technology, which can obviously cut down emissions when the buses are waiting at bus stops or a taxi waiting in a taxi rank if the driver hasn't turned the engine off. Again, overhead line electrification, if trains are using electric energy rather than diesel, providing you can create the energy renewably, will cut down and help environmentally. Alternative fuels, again, aren't typically currently financially sustainable, but potentially in the future hydrogen may be more financially and environmentally sustainable. And the other part is less stopping, so for buses and trains, there's 20 minutes difference in the same train from Southampton to Portsmouth, and that extra 20 minutes the train's either stopped or speeding up and slowing down, which can take a lot of energy, and that's obviously additional energy and less sustainable. But obviously if you have less stops, it's less accessible for people. but it's looking at each network individually, may be able to get rid of as many stops as possible without putting people off. So for example, around the uni there's I think about 4 stops for buses, and realistically you could probably get rid of at least 1 or 2 of them and increase the environmental effect because they're not constantly stopping around the uni without putting anyone off getting the bus because they have to walk an extra 2 minutes.
So Aidan here. An example of a sustainable transport planning to look at for us and other governments include the Netherlands government. They're aiming for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. To achieve this, central government is working with other government authorities and transport operators to encourage more people to use public transport. So as we can see, trains, buses, trams and metros can transport lots of people at the same time with fewer carbon emissions. And that's why the government's encouraging people to use public transport instead of driving. And it's making significant investments in public transport in the years ahead, for example in more frequent train services and more bicycle storage in stations. Public transport in the Netherlands is already highly sustainable. Since 2017, all electric passenger trains have been powered using green energy. And under the new voluntary agreement on zero emissions bus transport, all new buses must have 100% renewable energy or fuel from 2025 onwards. And all buses must be fully emission free from 2030. Central government is also working with other parties to explore the possibilities presented by hydrogen powered trains. And in addition, the government has made multi-annual agreements with a large number of sectors on improving energy efficiency. And the railway has agreed to actually make a 2% reduction every year. The government wants railway authorities to consider sustainability when building and managing railway stations, and solar panels can produce energy for lights, heaters, lifts and escalators, for example. And when building new stations, careful consideration is always given to the choice of materials. So there is also, so we keep saying that there is significant investments that needs to be put into public transport, but how do governments actually fund these transport, which is really important? So we have a few options here. So public-private partnerships, which are methods that allow for private sector participation and risk sharing. To be effective, they must offer sufficient value for money compared to traditional public methods, and right institutional capacities and processes must be in place. Experience today suggests that PPPs are particularly suited for BRTs, highly used and specific road links, and shared use vehicle and bicycle systems. Then we have land value capture tools, which are revenues from the indirect and proximity benefits generated by transport infrastructure, for example, when constructing a new station, for example. So the housing prices will go up in that area, and these funds can fund the transport projects. Examples of land value capture tools include development charges, development rights, and joint developments. And to date, these tools have been mainly applied to roads, metros, and rails. Then we have loans, grants, and loan guarantees, which are traditional financial tools frequently used to leverage private investments to large-scale rail and metro projects that otherwise would be fully owned or operated by public stakeholders. Infrastructure banks or funds can play a transitional role to disperse loans and guarantees. And then we have green bonds, which have the potential to attract institutional investors such as pension funds and insurance companies by tapping into the debt capital markets, and which are currently underexploited for green infrastructure investments. And in the end, we have short-run subsidies, which can be used to provide transitional support to sustainable transport options and technologies. And they can be used to foster innovations, ramp up production, offset upfront capital costs, and compensate for network infrastructure bias towards fossil fuel-based transport. Examples include charging for electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles.
Hi, so I'm Sam. I'm looking at transport policy implementation. So traditional transport planning invested in traffic mitigation, which was a short-term solution to a long-term problem, whereas new sustainable transport methods focus on people, which should result in long-term change, and they usually follow a behaviour model, as the one shown, which is used in the marketing industry to create a long-term behaviour change. And the first stage is awareness, so creating an awareness campaign for the public to get engaged, for example, into a new public transport policy. This then leads to the public contemplating whether the policy is a viable option for them. This can be through incentives, and this should lead to participation of this policy, and then theory states that continued participation of this policy will lead to long-term behaviour change, and this is what we believe financial investments should be based on these policies which promote this long-term behaviour change. And an industry which could benefit maybe more from this mindset would be looking at the work industry, so businesses in particular, so from shifting employee transport needs to sustainable alternatives should be promoted by employers and businesses. Why is this important? Well, it's important because when car travel is the most common method of commute, it accounts for 67% of all commutes, which is a very inefficient way of transporting through our urban environments. And if we could change the mindset of people to use public transport, increase the uptake of public transport, reduce CO2 emissions and congestion in our urban areas. Focusing more on business travel in general, how we can achieve this. First would be to reduce the need to travel. So only take travel that is essential, and you can reduce travel by video conferencing or just working from home. Secondly, if travel is essential, then think about the modes of travel you're using. Reduce private car, look for public transport. And then thirdly, if a private vehicle is required then for your business, then you should look at electric vehicles or highly efficient carbon hybrid fuel vehicles. And then the benefits from adopting this mindset for businesses is threefold. It's similar to the sustainability pillars mentioned. So first, there would be significant financial savings from reducing business travel to only essential travel. You can significantly reduce the amount of money you're spending on this travel. There are obvious environmental benefits from this, as less travel will reduce less CO2 in the future, and also encouraging employees to uptake in public transport will further reduce CO2. And then finally, there's benefits to the employees themselves. By the employees using public transport, they should increase their health from cycle to work schemes, for example. An example of a company which has implemented this mindset is PwC. Over the last 10 years, they have reduced business travel to only essential travel, and also encouraged employees to undertake public transport for commutes, and they've reduced their carbon CO2 emissions for travel by 4% in the last 10 years, whilst doubling in company size in the same period. So to conclude, we believe there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's a range of options that should be made to increase public transport, so improving the customer experience through accessibility and ease of payments, promoting the use of public transport policies is important. Also network improvements, so improving punctuality and frequency of services will make it a more attractive option. And this has to be accompanied by financial policies which are geared towards sustainable transport change, and also a consideration of green businesses, which can play a large role in sustainable transport systems in the future. And that's it.
Okay, thanks very much, Group 2. Any questions or comments for Group 2? Barry.
Hi, I was just wondering whether did you look into potentially the impact of red routes for buses?
We had a look into it, but we're more sort of focusing on stuff that would get more people on them as well.
Yeah.
So ones that more safe to the public, and this is now a better option.
Yeah. Well, because I was just thinking with the red route, because it means cars can't really park on the road.
Yeah.
It means that your journey times are going to be more reliable.
Yeah.
And you're going to have potentially shorter bus times.
It was something that could have been mentioned.
Yeah, Ollie?
Do you think the move to transport away from private car use will be kind of a generational thing, as in you have to wait generation of students with public transport sort of grains rather than using a private car?
Yeah, it definitely won't be instant. I think a lot of, as previously been said, a lot of people just don't like getting the bus. So sort of getting over the you not liking it is more important or less important than what's good for the environment.
Yeah.
So you, understandably, you define public transport as mainly being bus and trains. But what about ride sourcing apps like Uber and Lyft? Are they A, public transport? Maybe that doesn't really matter. B, what impact are they having, if any, on conventional bus and rail services? And C, you can predict what my third question is going to be: are they sustainable? Who would like to have a go at answering some of that?
I would say Uber could be a public transport in the future. For example, there's another company called Viavan, if you know about it, in London, which are pretty much glorified bus services or taxi services, where they have 15 passengers in the car, and you pretty much pay the same amount of money as you take the train, but instead you pretty much have a taxi. So I think the future of Uber would be going into kind of large scale in that transport of having just only 4 passengers to 15, 20, and they could become a much wider public transport than they are right now.
Yeah. So Uber have I think their equivalent is Uber Pool in the States. They do have a bigger vehicle variant. And a previous group we talked about in passing road pricing in New York. Actually, one of the reasons that may come in is it's a form of taxation of the ride sharing vehicles that are proliferating in Manhattan. But the more general question is, because I guess many of you, how many people in this room have used Uber? Yeah. Okay. The fact that most of you are on the course probably means you're interested in the environment. But is it sustainable? Is it a sustainable way of travel?
Probably a bit less sustainable almost than using a car, depending on how well the sort of trips are planned. Like if the Uber driver was to go to one person's house, take them to the city centre, then pick someone up to the city centre and take them somewhere else, then that would be quite sustainable. But if they're going from the city centre to someone's house to pick them up, and like constantly in and out, then that might be less sustainable.
Yeah. And so I think the question isn't, it's a little it's kind of related to your coursework, and also a number of tables that people have shown, and you've got so I think you had a table at the beginning of your presentation where you've got a CO2 equivalence emissions grams per passenger kilometre for bus and train, but of course that depends on the load factor, and those load factors vary massively for buses depending where they are. Also depends on vehicle type, etc., etc., and all of that could relate also to Uber, but it's probably true that essentially all Uber is really is a load of algorithms, isn't it, underpinning the app, and that's at the moment not taking into account any environmental considerations. Perhaps somebody could come up with a green Uber and see if there was a market niche for it. Anyway, just a thought. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, we'll let group 2 off the hook, given they were waiting for a long time. Thanks very much. Right, now we've got one last bonus presentation. Doug is going solo because he signed up too late, really, to join a group. It would have been, I think, unfair on other groups. but he has done a presentation. How long are you going to go for, Doug?
About 5 minutes.
Well, you get those done in 5 minutes. Well, it's be like racing commentary, I think, horse racing commentary. Just move to the away from the screen a moment so I can find your presentation. Where were you? You were seminar number. Was you? Or were you number? You were number 3. I think. Yeah, there we go. So this is building on a bit from last week. Is that doing anything? Yeah, here it goes. Okay, then just move us on with that control. So I'm not going to stop you if you overrun by 5 minutes, but your fellow students might throw in things at you if you go on too long. Okay?
So I'm looking at road vehicle technologies for sustainable transport. So a little bit of background. So transport currently makes up around 27% of the EU's CO2 emissions. So of that 27%, almost 3/4 of that is directly attributable to road transport, with light-duty vehicles making up about 15% and heavy-duty vehicles making up about 6% of total EU CO2 emissions. So this is showing the change between 1990, which is generally used as the index year, and 2016. As you can see, there's generally a downward trend in pretty much all sectors other than transport, which is actually up 26% over the past 26 years rather. Over that same period, road transport accounted for about 22% of that increase, with aviation and maritime transport making up a larger component. So the question I'm looking to answer is, how might developments in heavy duty and light duty road vehicle technology contribute to sustainable transport? So firstly, what is sustainable road transport? So sustainable transport looks at three main factors. So it's looking at economic efficiency. So how does it affect money pretty much? Ecological stability, so the environment, but on both a local and a global scale, and social equity, which is ensuring that there's a fair distribution of resources, choice, and so on. So this is looking dominantly at the environment. So the King Review in 2007, so Professor Julia King looked at how road transport could be decarbonised in the UK and in the world. And she looked at 3 key areas. So she looked at fuel efficiency, which is pretty much looking at how we get our fuel to power our vehicles. Vehicle technology, so how do we make our cars, and consumer choices, so how do we use them. And then once again, I'm looking at vehicle technology mainly. So vehicle technology can largely be split up into 2 main areas. So light duty vehicle technologies and heavy duty vehicle technologies. So with light duty vehicles, you're looking at passenger cars and vans, so smaller vehicles, and heavy duty vehicles would be sort of your bigger trucks and buses, so they're more freight orientated. And this is just a little interesting comparison. So in the UK, light duty vehicles make up around 90% of all vehicles in the UK. Meanwhile, heavy duty vehicles are only around 10%, but they account for a disproportionate amount of CO2 emissions, so about 40%. So first I'll go through a few light duty vehicle technologies. So here's a quote from the King Review, and it pretty much says that in order for road transport to be decarbonised, we need a form of electric vehicle charged by zero carbon electricity or hydrogen. Here's another quote, and it says that by 2030 we could have cars which emit 50% less carbon dioxide, and probably largely be to do with the wider adoption of battery electric vehicles and hybrid technologies. So what are hybrid and electric vehicles? What are hybrid vehicles and battery electric vehicles? So the main differences are with a hybrid vehicle you have a gasoline engine and or a combustion engine and an electric motor, whereas a battery electric vehicle is just powered by an electric motor. And the difference between the two hybrid vehicles are that with the plug-in hybrid, it's recharged from the electric grid, whereas with a non-plug-in hybrid, a conventional one, the combustion engine powers a generator which charges the battery pack. So this is the conventional hybrid. So as I mentioned, it relies on both combustion engine and an electric motor. And these can be full or mild hybrids, meaning that a full hybrid can operate just based on its electric motor, whereas with the mild hybrid, it's largely supporting the combustion engine. It maybe powers the electronics and so on. And so, just an example, the conventional hybrid Toyota Prius emits about 78 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometre. So what benefits do we get from using conventional hybrid vehicles? So you can, with the, like I mentioned before, the combustion engine and the electric motor can work together during heavy acceleration. It can use the electric motor during stop and start traffic, so it's known as idle-off technology. So it just reduces the emissions associated with starting from a complete stop, where most of the emissions arise. And also there's a technology known as regenerative braking, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail later, which is a way of producing electricity for later use from the braking or deceleration. A plug-in hybrid, unlike the conventional hybrid where the electric motor is sort of acting to support the combustion engine, it actually runs in all electric modes with the combustion engine acting as a backup. And an example is the Chevrolet Volt, which emits about 27 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometre. So what benefits does this give us? So with the plug-in hybrid, you can get a much larger all-electric range. And as you can see, so the second generation Chevrolet Volt could do about 38 miles. And 2016, which is the third generation, could do 50 miles. So that all-electric range is getting higher. But then you also have the backup combustion engine, which eliminates what's known as range anxiety. So it's the worry that you might get stranded without any more battery. And the battery electric vehicle, this solely operates on its electric motor. And so all vehicles don't have 0 grams of CO2 per kilometre. But note that is the tank to wheel emissions. So obviously, if you looked at the road to wheel, then there would be some emissions associated with it. So if these battery electric vehicles emit 0 grams of CO2 per kilometre, why aren't they more widely adopted? So I feel like this comes down to 3 main reasons. So the first is battery range. So the 2017 Tesla Model S, which is the best performing electric vehicle in terms of range, can do about 337 miles on a full charge. But if we actually look at just a full Focus, for example, on a full tank that can do 421 miles, so is that really an issue? So, and if we look at how ranges have been changing over time, then we can see that there's quite an upward trend, particularly over the past 4 or 5 years. So if battery range is an issue, what about the lack of charging points? Because it's all good having a long range, but if you can't charge your vehicle, then what's the point? But if we actually break it down then, so in the UK there's about 4,100 charge points, so that works out to about 1 charge point for every 39 electric vehicles. On the other hand, with traditional fuel stations, you've got only about double the amount of charge points, but you're talking about 31 million conventional vehicles, and of that, so that works out to about 1 fuel station to every 3,600 vehicles. Sorry. So what I think the main issue with myself. Sorry. I think the main issue comes down to the time it takes to achieve a full charge. So that's typically, with a typical electric motor, it takes about 8 hours from empty to full. But rapid charge technologies take about 30 minutes to an hour, but at the cost of you get some increased degradation of the battery. So I feel that in order for there to be wider adoption of battery electric vehicles, there needs to be a look at all 3 of these factors, but predominantly the time it takes to charge. So the regenerative braking that I mentioned earlier, it's also known as kinetic energy recovery system. I believe if you watch Formula 1. And so what this technology does is it takes the energy from the what would usually be wasted heat when decelerating, and it instead uses the motor as a sort of generator to turn this energy into electrical energy instead, which can then be stored in the battery for later use. So with the Tesla Model S, drivers reported about 15 to 20% on average recaptured, but that could be as high as 30%. Similar technologies used on the London Underground with some of the newer stock, which returns about 20% into the network. So moving on to heavy duty vehicles. So I thought I'd lead on to electric heavy duty vehicles. So are these possible or practical? So in the case of buses and waste trucks, you're involved in frequent stops and starts. So switching to electric vehicles could reduce the higher emissions associated. So the idle off technology can help. But in terms of trucking, so long haul journeys, they're typically to the magnitude of thousands of miles. And with the limited range of battery packs, it's a trade-off between increased weight and a shorter range, where in an industry where delays mean a loss of revenue. So the Tesla Semi is actually one form of battery electric heavy duty vehicle which has been proposed. It's expected to begin production in 2020, and it will be semi-autonomous and has a range of 400 to 500 miles. But if you have to recharge after every 400 to 500 miles, then is it really a practical solution to long distance hauling? So an alternative proposal is that of the quaternary trucks. So these are trucks powered by overhead line equipment, similar to electric trains. So the idea is that you install this overhead line equipment on the heavily travelled routes, so motorways and so on. And that line also charges an onboard battery. So that battery, you'd rely on that battery for sort of changing lanes and shorter distances where you're travelling to your end destination. So obviously there's going to be quite a significant cost in terms of infrastructure if you're introducing these catenaries over a wide range, a large amount of the road transport network. Just a little breakdown of the life cycle costs compared to a battery electric truck like the Tesla Semi and a diesel truck. What you can see that there's the green sections highlighting the infrastructure cost, and as you can see, there's a much larger infrastructure cost with the catenary trucks. So the continuous catenaries, they're sort of about 90% of the routes would be you travel on the catenary for 90% of the route, and then the remaining 10% is typically when you're leaving the network to travel to your end destination. Whereas with sectional catenaries, you're only on a catenary for about a third of the route, which means that you can get lower infrastructure costs, but then it's a bit more. You'd need more powerful batteries, for instance. Larger batteries, and so it's a bit of a trade-off. So just to show you where these costs come from, there's the cost of the vehicle. So that could be retrofitting your existing fleets or just purchasing them outright. Fuel, so electrical energy, and with your infrastructure, you're looking at catenaries and substations. So what you can see is that although you've got the higher infrastructure costs, you're actually spending a lot less on energy compared to the diesel truck, which a substantial amount of the life cycle costs are associated with the fuel use. And the last technology I wanted to talk about is platooning. So this is a new sort of technology which is starting to be trialled in the UK. And with this technology, how it essentially works is you have a lead vehicle which is controlling a convoy of vehicles, which can generally or through autonomous vehicle-to-vehicle technologies and communication. And what the purpose of this is that the vehicles can travel a lot closer together, which has the effect of reducing drag, which then reduces your fuel use or your energy use. It reduces congestion, and it could potentially be fully autonomous into the future. And that's it.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. Any quick questions or comments for Dan?
Just for the battery powered vehicle, is it quite easy to replace the battery? Because you're saying they get they go through degradation, whatever. Is it quite easy to replace the battery?
So what I understand was with battery electric vehicles, the maintenance costs are a lot lower than typical your conventional vehicle, because it's a lot simpler in terms of the mechanics.
Yeah.
I'm not actually too sure about how easy it is to change the batteries, but the overall maintenance costs are low.
I think the batteries are quite easy to replace.
So I know
It's more the cost.
Isn't it? Tesla's floor is literally it's just made of batteries, isn't it? Like the whole floor is just a battery. There's loads of batteries. So I wonder how easy it is to take everything off and replace it.
I don't know about the Teslas, but I know the Nissan Leaf, it's relatively easy to replace, but it can be. One of the early versions, it was £10,000 to replace the battery pack. So that's a bit of a barrier. Any other questions or comments? Well, Doug, I just have one last one for you. In the heavy duty, did you come across any hydrogen fuel cell vehicles as an alternative to battery electric vehicles, and how did they rate?
I did, but I didn't think I'd have enough time to include it. But I think with the the hydrogen fuel cell technologies is, I think the big issue is safety.
Yeah.
So, because it's obviously hydrogen's explosive, that's. Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So I was just wondering whether you had seen anything about the prospects for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles
Yeah.
for the heavy duty vehicle fleet.
That was actually one of the technologies that Julia King said would, alongside electric energy, would be quite useful in reducing road transport emissions. But yeah, sorry, I haven't.
Yeah, and I think it's fair comment that safety may well be a big barrier there. Okay, well, thanks very much for your time. So that's everything for today. On a master's course, I like to have these seminar sessions towards the end, because then I get to be able to know virtually every member of the class, and I think when you're studying your fourth year, that's quite important. As you know, you've got a group. I'll be marking a group stuff tonight, so while I remember it's fresh in my mind. It'll be uploaded on Panopto. You've got a week to write up a reflective log, which is essentially thinking about the sustainability question, but with respect to the things you've studied and how they can contribute to sustainability, but also relative to other things you've heard about this afternoon. So hopefully the Panopto will upload, and you can listen back if you can bear to hear the sound of your own voice. If you can, you're a braver man than I. And the other thing is, somebody spotted I put the pro forma for the wrong coursework up on the transport, energy and environment. Look rather similar, but the right marking pro forma is, so if anybody looked at the old one and thought, what the heck was this about, look at the new one. It'll be much clearer. It might help you just in bringing your reflective log together. Then next week it'll be a course summary revision and a revision class. Also a chance for you to ask me any questions about any material that we've covered over the semester. I'll also give some generic feedback about the first lot of coursework, and possibly a little bit about your group presentations next week. I did say I was going to, for coursework 1, I was going to put some model answers up. I have put some model answers up now. So have a look at those. If there was anything in my comments, hand scribbled comments you couldn't follow, might be clearer when you look at some model answers with model in inverted commas, of course. So, right, thanks very much for your time, and I'll see you again next week.